Hey, what's up, Will? Making another video, and so I'll have to probably space this one out by not releasing it immediately. Basically, what I want to say in this video, and first of all, I want to start out by saying that I'm wearing my big old fake class ring that I got a year ago on Temu. You know, I've always wanted to have a big old class ring like this instead of the little bitty excuse of a class ring that is the biggest one for girls. I've always wanted to have like a men's class ring, which had a lot to do with me, deciding that I wanted to be male or live as male as a teenager, which, I mean, it certainly wasn't the only thing, but, it's ironic because as much as men hate jewelry, the fact that jewelry had anything to do with me wanting to be a guy meant that I wasn't probably a guy inside or out after all. So instead of, having some fake ring made with a fake name on it, or ordering from eBay a ring that some guy no longer wanted, that just happens to be small enough for me, I decided to buy a plain generic ring that just has that cabochon look and doesn't say anything. It's got the dimensions of a class ring without actually being a class ring. And I'm certainly not going to be disrespectful enough to buy a fake army ring and pretend to be a veteran, because I'm not. And so, yep, that's enough about my rings. What I want to talk about in this video, I'm wearing my DQ Dairy Queen sunglasses. I wish more fast food places had their own sunglasses. But it was like a freebie thing. My actual class ring is one that I've never shown because it doesn't fit and because I don't want you to know my name. So anyway, what I want to talk about in this video, I want to title it, I Miss Texas. And I truly do. I miss living in Texas because there was just so much, well, not only, so much to be proud of. I was just proud of the state, not only for being big, but, one of the states that people from other countries actually recognize, unlike this one. I mean, this one is pretty much just known for outdated and embarrassing things that are not exactly true for me. You know what I'm saying? A lot of the things that this state is known for, which I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but a lot of the stereotypes about the state are nothing to be proud of, like being backwoods country, not very smart. And that's what people often think of when they think of the state. They think of like backwoods, racist white people that, support things like slavery, even though they didn't necessarily own slaves because they were too poor. And to an extent, most of the white people are conservative. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a white liberal around here. But the reality about the state that I'm living in is that it's actually, well, in some ways it's more diverse than Texas. Texas, you primarily had two groups of people. You had your shrinking population of Anglos, so to speak, white people that spoke English and were generally well-to-do, though not necessarily. And then you had mostly people speaking Spanish, or people, with a strong Spanish culture in their background. And that's why there was no shortage of Mexican restaurants in Texas. Not just Taco Bell's and one good Mexican place. So, you had your Spanish speaker. It was basically Spanish and English were your two predominant groups. Then, of course, you had some blacks. But around here, I mean, the average person is black. You know, to put it bluntly, the average person around here is black. And that kind of sucks. It kind of sucks. I would never say that to one of them, but it kind of sucks. Because, they taught us to buy into our own replacement and just, support diversity without ever asking, who does that benefit? Who benefits from diversity? Do I benefit from diversity? Probably not. So, the average person is black around here. And, it's not terrible, I guess. If as many people spoke Spanish as are black, like in Texas, then you kind of have a language barrier. You have a hard time understanding people. But I miss Texas because there is an extreme, what people think, what you would think would be different from Texas is not what actually is. I made a song about it. My memories from a year ago are coming back. The song about the Texas rain and how people say it doesn't rain in Texas. Well, it's kind of like the girls don't poop thing and, all that stuff, that silly stuff that I take seriously because I don't like jokes. I don't like people exaggerating. I don't like people saying things in a sarcastic way that doesn't make any sense. And this thing about it not raining in Texas, well, most people don't say that. But what few people say that are usually from here. And they mean that compared to here, it, quote, doesn't rain in Texas. It's almost like they have Texas confused with New Mexico or Arizona or Southern California, which, by the way, it does rain in the Southwest. Just not as often as in the East. It's like the rain just kind of, the average precipitation kind of increases from west to east, or decreases from east to west, whichever way you look at it. The further west, the less it tends to rain on average. The further east, the more it tends to rain. To the point where, around here, you pretty much can't get through a day. You're hard-pressed to have a summer day with 0 raindrops falling out the sky. Even if it's just a sprinkle in the afternoon that goes away and becomes a sunny sky with a rainbow by 5 o'clock, becomes a sunny day with a few dark clouds. Even if it's that, you still tend to have some precipitation somewhere around here every day of the summer, to the point where you would almost need to cut your grass on average more than once a week, like 6 times a month instead of 4, basically. So about every 5 days instead of every week. By the end of a week, it's quite long. And, it's very frustrating for the average person, but it's great if you're a lawn service and you have the men who can do it. So, and the equipment. But in Texas, it does rain a lot in the summer. Most of the time they get showers in June and July. And they get hurricanes, contrary to what people think. There are hurricanes that have made landfall and done a lot of damage in Texas. But it rains slightly more over here. But what people don't understand is that the biggest difference is not the weather. The biggest difference is not what you would think it would be. It is not the weather. That is the biggest difference that I see from Texas. The weather is only slightly different. The temperature is about the same, roughly. The precipitation is just slightly more because we're a little further east. And probably if you went further east from here, you would get even more precipitation than we get, or about the same. It's kind of like once you get over the Gulf of Mexico, that's when you get more precipitation in the summer, because it evaporates and moves north. It goes northward from the Gulf. And that's why we have those unfortunately warm, mild winters. Because that water over the Gulf is still warm. And, I guess our summers could be hotter if we live further west, like over 100 more often. So, the biggest difference around here, as I stated before, is the population. It's just very different. It's not so much that they're black, but it's like you have a lot of people, that they just really hate their job. And it just sucks so much when you were told all your life that diversity benefits everyone, when you know for a fact that is not true. That you have not benefited from DEI in any way. And, it's like the difference I see between living in Texas and living over here. Not only are things slightly more expensive, you pay a little bit more at the store for the same product on average. That was the hardest adjustment for my mom. When she went from 23 years living in Texas to the state where she was born, back to be closer to our family. So the price is a little more here. And that really hits hard when you're not rich, as is the stereotype about white Texans, or white people anywhere. There's this stereotype that we're just all driving Cadillacs and Bentleys, or whatever Bentley is, Porsches, whatever the expensive car of the day is, and that we all, live in huge houses and have people cut our grass and clean our house for us, and we can afford anything we want, any clothing we want. That couldn't be further from the truth. So, the biggest difference I have found is the population. Where there were Hispanics in Texas, there are blacks over here. Where there were blacks in Texas, there are Hispanics over here. So it's like flipped. It's like the white population is roughly the same, more or less. The percentage that's white, maybe a little more white over here. But, it's like you have more Hispanics than blacks in Texas. And over here you have more blacks than Hispanics. But you do have all races in all states. And about, less than 1% Asian. And so, what the biggest difference is that could just be us. We're just worse off financially than when we lived in Texas. When my parents were married. And my mom was still at least getting a check from my dad in some way. But, it's just very hard, to go to the store and pay more for the same exact product that you could have bought slightly cheaper in Texas. And the other difference is the service. It's just horrible. You can go to the exact same restaurant, and that's why they don't stay in business over here. Nice restaurants, it's like everything stays small over here. Everything is so countrified. A lot of the stereotypes about Texans and country music and cowboy this and countrified that, and the things, like, you could make a movie over here set here, like have it all set up here, and say that it's in Texas, and people would believe it. You know what I'm saying? Especially if you only shoot during sunny weather. Like, you hardly ever shoot when it's raining, to make the weather look more like Texas. You could definitely have like a farm over here, because the state is so rural that it's just unbelievable. The vast majority of the U.S., if you ever take a road trip, you'll see that most of the U.S. is rural countryside. So this lie of overpopulation is kind of a myth. People just live all concentrated in certain areas. But this state even more so than Texas, is just very rural. You know, just vast open areas with no real development to speak of. Whereas Texas, well, I mean, the biggest cities over here are just, it's like they don't hold a candle to, you know, most of the bigger cities in Texas. You know what I'm saying? The biggest city here is nothing compared to the biggest city in Texas. You know, the top 10 cities over here would be just normal communities in Texas. And so yeah, it's like, it's just very rural. Nothing big and important seems to want to locate here. You know, nice restaurants don't last because the people, you know, the white population is slightly poorer here, you know, probably because everything just costs so much more. So that, you know, you just don't have, you know, your big fancy restaurants. You know, there are as many of them here. You might have to go to like the biggest 5 cities here to have, you know, what we used to have right there in our backyard in the suburbs of Houston, you know. And so, you know, it's very hard on me to adjust to this. I never really wanted to live in this state. To be honest with you, I wish my parents would have just stayed married, even if they were unhappy. And, you know, lived in Texas forever, died together, probably one before the other, in Texas, in that big old house, with enough money to pay someone to do the grass once a week. And, you know, I just wish they would have stayed in Texas, where things were bigger and better. I used to be very proud to live in Texas. And that's one of the many reasons why I deleted my old channel, because it had so much about Texas. You know, I also don't want to be found in real life. But, you know, when I went and lived with my dad, you know, there's a number of things causing that. You know, for one thing, my mom thought that confiscating my packages would stop me from ordering dolls or wanting to have them. The other thing was that, well, I mean, the biggest thing was I wanted, and this is what I would never want to say to his face, I wanted to live in Texas more than I wanted to live with my dad. I mean, I would never want to hurt his feelings by saying that. But what I wanted back when I moved back with him, after moving to this state with my mom and living there for 2.5 years, I wanted to be back in Texas more than I wanted to be with him. And I was just so, never could bring myself to admit that because it would have hurt him. It would have hit him hard to hear that. But I wanted to re-experience living in Texas and passing by my old schools where I used to go in elementary, middle, high school, and of course college. I wanted to, you know, see what had become of them over the years after several remodels. I wanted to see and shop at the old stores that I remember going to when I was younger. I wanted to, you know, just be in Texas again, eat at the restaurants that were like our favorites to go eat as a family, even if they changed them a bit. You know, I wanted to live in Texas, and I was willing to suffer, you know, living at his apartment to an extent. Didn't actually realize how much I was suffering until that fire happened, you know, and scared me to death in November of 2021. I guess it could have been worse if it was our unit. But the other thing about this place, you know, as I was saying, it's just so small and quaint. Everything, every town, it looks like it's just so small and quaint compared to Texas and the Houston area in particular. Because, like, we could have moved to an apartment here, around here. There are apartments around here. It's big enough to have apartments. But here's the thing, and of course he was considering that. Like, if the fire hadn't happened, and I hadn't been so adamant about, I will not live anywhere but a house with you, I'll go back with Mom. And of course, if we hadn't found this house or whatnot, we may have moved to one of their apartments around here. But here's the thing, you see. Even the apartments are very different around here. Everything is different around here because it is so small. So like you moved to an apartment in Texas. The apartment we lived in was huge. It was like bigger than some university campuses or dorms. High schools were like universities. Big 5A schools. That's why I don't want people knowing my high school. But the apartments were huge, as you well know. And that's why there were so many fires during the time that we lived there. I mean, we're talking thousands of tenants in just one complex. And there were like so many complexes clustered along a street. Like you'd have big old streets. There were just nothing but apartments leading up to a store. And, you had even bigger apartments than ours. You had 3-story apartments. And I would have hated to live on the top floor of one of those. But they usually had swimming pools. Ours had tennis courts. They often had weight rooms, They had several laundry rooms. And they had amenities. Just cool things that you got to experience by being a resident. But around here, like if we was to move to the apartment that most closely resembles what we used to have, it would be like, even though the buildings would be somewhat similar, it would be like a fraction. It would be like one wing or one little corner of the complex we used to live in with a leasing office. It would be like if a small segment of our apartment broke off and had its own leasing office and mailroom. No pool, no weight room, no tennis courts, no nothing except a leasing office and a mailroom inside. That's about what the apartments are mostly like around here. Some of them are only 1 story, which is great for reduced risk of fire and death. But they just don't have a lot of amenities. We don't have a public pool anymore, thanks to COVID. We don't really have, just a lot of things for young people to get involved in around here. Unless you get involved in a church, unless you join a gym, or unless you check yourself into a nice hotel for the night. You don't get to swim. That's another reason I haven't been making videos, because I have a jacuzzi, which is the closest I'll get to swimming. It's like a little blow-up jacuzzi, but it's good enough for me. You just don't have the amenities. You have to provide everything for yourself, practically, and be okay with just what you can provide. And that's why people are more likely to get married at a young age. And you don't have as many, single people that are just content to stay that way. Because, if you're not married, it's hard to live the city life, basically, around here. You just don't have the city life. And whatever you can't provide for yourself, you're probably not going to have. So you can't just, spend all your time at a gym or, the pool at your apartment or whatnot and fulfill that need for social connection. You could join a church, but they're probably going to tell you that you need to get married, if there's any youth left in you at all as a woman. But it's just a very countrified life. And the worst part about it is that, instead of, people that who were born speaking Spanish, because, you had people, you could be living next door to someone at your apartment who talked to their kids in Spanish and nothing else. It's just nothing but Spanish. Even their TV was playing stuff in Spanish all day. But around here, the problem is, it's like you have these, it seems like these black people that were taught from an early age that they do not have to respect white people. And I've had a horrible job experience wherein I was treated that way, and basically, calling white people blue-eyed devils, but yet never looking to see that my eyes aren't blue. And they were deliberately saying these things in front of me or around me to really make me mad and try to get me to fight, but I never would. And, just horrible, like, I don't know, just people who feel entitled to be ugly to white people in every which way they can. And some of them are not. Some of them can be nice. But, I mean, you can, like for example, Chili's was one of our favorite restaurants everywhere. When you go to Texas and you get some really good service, you're greeted at the door. The minute you enter the door, it's beautiful at Christmas most of the time. I mean, they have the lights and the Christmas music. And it's a wonderful experience to eat at Chili's. You wish you could do it every day, if only you had the money. You come over here, same place. But yet you can wait 15 minutes for someone to acknowledge the fact that you have entered the door. And there are 3 people working, and they're doing everything they can to wait on everybody in the whole place. It's like they hardly have anybody working. You go to the Dollar Tree around here, 1 person to check everybody out. And it's like they're just so understaffed because they just don't have enough people to fill the jobs. And when it's like there's just so many black people sometimes working for a company. And so if they have this hostility towards white people, well, guess how much a white person is going to want to work there with that level of hostility being thrown at them every day, like what I had to endure working in a fast food place in my mom's town. Guess how much they're going to want to work there? Not much. So, it's like they're forced to hire such people. But then when they do, it's like, how much are you as a white person going to want to take that off of somebody? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, you can only be like, treated so badly and you just can't take it anymore. And, so it's like there aren't a lot of good jobs around here. And, you just kind of, it's like, that's what I'm saying. It's just so amazing to me how the same exact place of business can be so very different from one place to another. Well, I mean, we even noticed this from, going like from the Houston one to our closer one. You could have the same exact restaurant and they'd be very different. It all goes by management and who works there. So and like at Christmas time, I mean, some places are really good about decorating. And I love to go to those. The ones I know, like Chick-fil-A, are good about it. But they may not put anything out. And they feel like they don't have to. So, I know that's a long, ranty video. And also telling why I haven't been making videos, because I just don't get those opportunities anymore. But life is very different, with my dad always home and us not having enough money, telling me to get a job, but yet he doesn't try to get him a job. And, just not having the means to live as comfortably as we used to. And also not really having as happy of a life as we used to. Because it's like most people think nothing of getting on that highway. And that's the other thing. It's like you have to do a lot more driving to get the same exact thing, that would have been right there in your town in Texas. Just don't have the population. That's the problem. And especially not the white population. Because anybody who's white and can afford better moves. And it's like a dying community. A lot of the white people are really old. And it's like the young people are just not white. And they don't think they have to treat white people like they're worth a crap. And, so yeah. And this video's gotten too long, but yeah, just want to rant about that. And like, you know, I just wish I could live in Texas. I wish I could have never left Texas. But I don't know. This is just, you know, I guess if I could have seen forward to a day when living with my dad would no longer mean living in Texas, and I'd have to live in an older house than the one I was born into, slightly. But age-wise, it's been through worse hell, obviously. You know, if I'd have known that living with him wouldn't mean having a lot of money. Oh, and the other thing is it takes us slightly longer to get our mail, just because we're not as close to the biggest nearby city. And I don't know, Texas just has so many more hubs of, you know, important things than the state. And the other thing is like, Walmart doesn't have as good of an inventory. So while you're shopping at the same store, you know, they just don't like to have as big of a variety of things because they can't sell as many, you know, they can't stock what they can't sell. And so you might have to order online in more cases than if you lived in Texas. And also in Texas, you had more Walmarts close by. You know, around here, it's like you're lucky if you have a Walmart, a Dollar General, a Family Dollar, and a Dollar Tree to all compete with each other to keep the prices low. If you got that, you're lucky. Because some people barely even have that. As far as restaurants, you know, you just got your main fast food places, plus a few lesser known good restaurants, but really nice places cannot stay in business. They just can't because of the management. Because they don't have the people to work there. So, the video's way too long. I'll go ahead and post it, but I really miss living in Texas.